You are listening to the Cycling Podcast in association with Rapha, the fastest clothing in the world tour, the home of cycling with character. Ride and watch with Rapha in 2019 as they partner EF Education First and Canyon SRAM.
Here we go, lads. Lionel?
Yes, Richard?
You were sparkling last night in Edinburgh, but can you do it on a wet Thursday night in Leicester?
I hope so. My form has gone good day, less good day, less good day over the course of this Grand Tour.
You haven't done a Rowan Dennis yet, though.
Says you. Your form has gone good day.
We'll be the judge of that. Okay, let's go and sound check, fellas. Whoa!
Stand down. Buffalo down.
I mean, Lionel's sound checks are always very memorable. 1, 2. 1, 2. Nice venue, isn't it?
Lovely.
Okay, sound check, Lionel. Give us a...
1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2.
You're getting better at that.
That's now on.
Very loud and clear.
Yeah.
Good. That's good. Yeah, good. The only thing we've got to think about is how do we get Colin on and give him his mic?
Up these steps.
Is he coming from the auditorium?
Yeah.
Where are we, Lionel?
We are in the green room, I guess you'd call it, at the Y Theatre in Leicester, the penultimate stage of our Grand Tour 2019. About an hour and 15 minutes until curtain up this evening. Expecting a big crowd here in Leicester and a special guest, Colin Sturgess, former world professional pursuit champion. I'm feeling the butterflies now. This is normally where I start getting into the zone, ready for our performance.
We felt the butterflies last night, didn't we? We had a butterfly on stage.
Yeah, although you contested that it was a butterfly, you said it was a moth, but that's because you're colourblind. Is that right?
Yeah, that could be right. Someone told me afterwards they thought it was a moth, but it was a butterfly. And it was while we were talking about answering the call of nature, and so Daniel speculated it might be, in fact, that the butterfly of Maastricht, none other than Tom Dumoulin.
Well, I speculated that. The butterfly / moth actually landed on me. It was quite a startling moment, actually. It was.
There's a rider or a former rider who was known as the Moth.
Yeah, who was that again?
Franco Bitossi in the 70s. Also known as Crazy Heart. Bitossi had a sort of tachycardia, no laughing matter really, a heart arrhythmia. I never know how to pronounce this.
Oh, brilliant! Excellent. Daniel doesn't know how to pronounce something.
Yeah, he had a heart problem, which often forced him to sort of get off his bike mid-race and just stand at the side of the road until it subsided. And consequently, he became known as Crazy Heart. But earlier in his career, he was Il Falena, the moth, or is it La Falena? I'm not sure.
Oh, good.
Oh, brilliant! This is great. Why was he nicknamed the Moth? Did he chew holes in clothing?
No, it was just I think it was a reference to the way he used to attack. Sort of, well, how do moths fly? I'm not even sure how moths fly. Are they particularly explosive, or
who'd be the modern day moth?
They flutter off the front. I don't know. That's a good question. Maybe a listener could tell us who is the moth in the peloton.
It's actually a great nickname when you think about it like that. The kind of very
fluttering off the front of the peloton, bumping into things,
wishy-washy sort of attacks. Warren Barguil, no, that's unkind. Maybe Warren Barguil in some states. Anyway, well, Lionel, we said that we've every night on the Cycling Podcast Grand Tour, we've been collecting questions in Sean Kelly's old hat at the front of the stage. We haven't had time to get through them all, so we've collected some of them, and we're going to pick them at random here. Last night, though, in Edinburgh, there were a couple that were typed. And there was speculation that someone had actually brought a typewriter.
I suspect that somebody had thought about their question in advance and had brought them in, because I couldn't hear any typing in the audience over all the laughter, Richard, last night. But yeah, the questions have been great every night, and it's quite difficult, isn't it, to sift through them in real time and we just have to pick the most eye-catching ones as we go through. So let's answer something here now. Have you got one there, Richard?
Here's one of the typed questions for Daniele Friebe. If Daniel were to compare his speed golf style of play and or image to that of a current or recently retired professional cyclist, I presume, whom would he most liken himself to?
Well, last night I said Rog, didn't I? Primoz Roglic.
I think you said Pog.
Oh, did I say Pog? Yeah, man, a few words. Metronomic. Just, get it done.
Well, that was another question, wasn't it, about who are our favourite riders to interview? And we had a bit of a debate about that, didn't we? You like the Pogs and the Rogs, the men of few words.
Yeah.
Which is odd, really. An odd.
I find these days, it's a strange point to make for someone who participates in a podcast, but I find there's an overabundance of sort of eloquence and loquacity in professional cycling. Basically, people talk too much. Then they're too. I don't like it when pro bike riders are articulate. I like it when they're poorly educated, which is not to suggest that any of the riders I'm going to mention in the next couple of minutes are. But no, I find it slightly jarring, slightly strange when riders who are either about to embark on some sort of epic 6-hour struggle or have just completed some epic 6-hour struggle, are happily talking about the sort of book they've brought with them in their North Face suitcase. It's all so middle class and well educated now, isn't it? And yeah, I know that's kind of that's sort of your domain, though, isn't it, Rich? That kind of rider.
I mean, it's useful certainly for a podcast when riders are able to talk and explain themselves and describe things. That's always very useful. So yeah, I like those riders.
Just on the subject of riders, a few words. Did you notice that Arkea Samsic have had their first camp this week? Nasser Bouhanni talking a good game, but he's one I quite like interviewing because you always think he might just whack you.
I mean, they've also just established a women's team as well, Arkea Samsic, a team on the rise. I mean, they've announced the programmes for Quintana and Barguil.
Quite a lot of crossover there, which I don't know whether that did surprise me, but I'm not sure why. I mean, it makes perfect sense for them to build up some kind of rapport before going into the Tour. They're going to do Paris-Nice together. I think a couple of the hilly classics together. I think the Basque Tour of the Basque Country, or Itzulia as well. I've got high hopes for them.
Well, Quintana's learning French, and he seems... I wouldn't be surprised if he has a new lease of life. He's been at Movistar a long, long time. I don't think he was all that happy there. I always remember in Andorra a few years ago, we shared a hotel with Movistar, and he ate alone and came down quite late and ate alone and didn't seem fully integrated into the team. That was just one night, so I'm not forming a whole impression from that. But I get a sense of sort of enthusiasm and let's see how the season goes.
Well, if you think about the way that Barguil and Quintana are likely to ride, Barguil sort of specialises in these kind of whimsical long-range moves in the mountains. That's sort of perfect for Quintana, isn't it? Because he'll have the excuse. I mean, people sort of mock him for being a bit of a wheel sucker. I think that's a bit unfair, to be honest. But he's someone who likes riding a tempo in the mountains, doesn't he? So he can sit in and the whimsical flaneur or roller skate off the front.
There's a question. Sum up Shane Sutton in one word. Abrasive.
Well, you're going to tell your story about Shane Sutton's objection to being called abrasive.
Well, I can do. I described him as abrasive in an article that I wrote in the Telegraph a few years ago. I can't remember what year it was, and I got a text message from him that night that said, "Who the are you calling abrasive?" Which sort of answered its own question.
Another question, Rich.
Sorry for the obvious question, but can Chris Froome really come back after face planting a wall at 40 kilometres an hour?
It's a bit quicker than 40 kilometres an hour, wasn't it? I don't. Well, it's the $1 million question for next season, isn't it? He obviously thinks he can do. what's the kind of history of riders making recoveries from serious physical injuries? I mean, it's not quite in the same bracket as Greg LeMond nearly dying from gunshot wounds in 1986-87. But it was a serious and traumatic crash, and he's had a lot of surgery. And we're nearly in December, and this is the point where the hard work starts getting done, isn't it, for next year's Tour de France? So he is, figuratively speaking, off the back through no fault of his own. But I think it's going to be tough next year to see him being competitive at the Tour de France. I'm not sure that I see that.
We had Rod Ellingworth with us in London on Monday night, and we were asked that question, and he said that he thought he would be back and competitive at the Tour, didn't he? Because he knows his character, but we don't know the physical, the where he's at physically, I suppose, in his recovery, and it will not just be a matter of character and sort of the power of the mind and his determination. It's about his body, and when you see him moving, even he doesn't look anywhere near fully recovered. So it's hard to imagine, and he's not getting any younger. So it's yeah. I mean, we've been talking recently about Mark Cavendish and his prospects against some of the young sprinters coming through, and it's a similar thing with Chris Froome, where you look at Bernal and people like that, and even Pogacar and some of the younger GC riders, to imagine that 35-year-old Froome is going to be equal to them, I don't know. Who knows? Have the Yates twins plateaued? If so, what lies ahead for Matt White and Mitchelton Scott? We've asked that question quite a lot over the years, I think.
Yeah, I think we've sort of asked that at 2-year intervals, haven't we? And it has often seemed as though they've plateaued. They've had a couple of years where they've not really lived up to their own expectations as far as general classification is concerned. But then they've sort of surprised us, haven't they? No, I don't think they have plateaued. I think that Simon Yates is still sort of figuring a few things out. Simon in particular, about exactly how to peak for a Grand Tour. His issue, I think, is the riders that have come onto the scene in the last couple of years. There was a time about 18 months ago where it looked as though, if you sort of surveyed the landscape of Grand Tour riders, Simon Yates looked in pretty good shape, in pretty good position to sort of occupy one of the dominant roles in Grand Tours over the next few years. But since then, Pogacar's come on the scene, Bernal stepped up, Evenepoel is sort of waiting in the wings as well. And I would suggest that his problem might come from them rather than from his own ability to keep sort of nudging forward and improving slightly every year.
Again, Adam Blythe was a guest of ours on Monday night, and he said that he'd spoken to Simon Yates at the Dave Rayner dinner and asked him whether he'd be willing at any point in his career to move to a different team to his brother, and he said yes. I don't think that's a particular surprise, and they do seem very settled where they are. We've heard again through Matt White that there have been quite substantial offers for Simon Yates in particular to go elsewhere for a lot more money.
Mid-contract? To break his contract?
Well, the offer that he was talking about in particular was during the 2018 Giro, which he was leading, of course, and there was an offer that would have doubled his salary, and he turned it down.
From Trek?
No.
It came from the Middle East. From
one of those teams.
From one of those teams, not Bahrain Merida.
So, but I don't think it's a surprise to learn or to be told that they would be willing to separate, because I think they're obviously very close, but also very independent-minded young men, and quite different. And I think the differences are becoming more pronounced as they get a bit older. I mean, Adam Yates is, in terms of temperament in particular, he seems more suited perhaps one-day races, week-long races, where Simon Yates more so to the Grand Tours. And next year we know that he's doing the Giro again and will start the Tour, probably not finish it, and aim for the Olympic road race. And Adam Yates will target the Tour de France again.
The fastest clothing in the World Tour, the home of cycling with character. Ride and watch with Rapha in 2019 as they partner EF Education First and Canyon SRAM.
Thank you very much to Rapha, our title sponsor. Very grateful to them for their support, and it was wonderful to have some people from Rapha in the audience at our show on Monday night, including Simon Mottram, the chief executive. Adam Buxton is my other favourite podcast. So, can Lionel please do his impersonation of Adam's dog, Rosie, / Alex Dowsett?
Wow.
This is one that friends of the podcast will be familiar with from their road trip episode.
It is in the road trip episode, and I don't know whether that should be exclusive content for our friends of the podcast. What should that?
Well, you did a very good job of it on stage the other night.
I did, but again, only to sort of 300 odd people, not not to our vast audience. I wouldn't want to overstate how good it is, but it's excellent. So listen to the road trip episode for my Alex Dowsett / Rosie the dog impression. I must admit though, when I did it on stage, I did come up with quite a funny line. But maybe one.
Even if you do say so yourself.
Even if I do say so myself, yeah.
Well, if you want to sign up as a friend of the podcast, you can at thecyclingpodcast.com. You can still sign up for 2019 to get all the back catalogue. The 2020 Friends of the Podcast programme will be launching very, very soon. And the first episode will be about the infamous Stage 19 of the Tour de France, and also Egan Bernal, who didn't win that stage but crossed the summit of the Col de Liseron first and took the yellow jersey. And it's really the two stories. What happened that day? We hear from Seb Piquet, who was obviously central to the decision-making as the voice of race radio, and also from Bernal himself, from his coach, from Gianni Savio, and Theo Geoghegan-Hart. So that'll be the first episode of the 2020 Friends, and we'll have full details next week for people about how to sign up.
Another question. Who's the worst driver? I'm assuming that's out of the three of us. Want to nominate someone, Richard?
I think, I'll probably nominate Daniel. Daniel will probably nominate me. You'll nominate me as well.
Yeah. So it sounds like the first past the post system, it's Richard is the worst driver.
Really? Is that...
Your issue with driving is you think you're very good. Your hubris, arrogance, I think, is your big issue when it comes to driving. I think you're quite skilled.
I'm glad that you added when it comes to driving there.
You're quite a skilled driver, but unfortunately you're a very complacent driver. And I think various broken flower pots would testify to this over the years, and broken cars. Actually,
no, I've never broken a car.
No. I have. Well, as you say, Richard, during the tour, I pull the seat right forward so I can get my face right up against the windscreen. Like, what's the character in Driving Miss Daisy?
Lionel Birnie. I don't want to, sort of fight fire with fire there, Daniel, but I would say you're a very distracted driver and you can't park.
But this is as of about 2 or 3 years ago. I've not really driven much with you last 2 or 3 years.
Improved?
I've improved markedly. My time in Mallorca was invaluable, particularly as regards my parking technique.
Well, we were joined in London also by a very special guest, Stacy Snyder, who made the beautiful ceramic mugs which we sold during the Grand Tours this year to raise money for good causes. She flew over from Virginia just to come to our show, which was, it was great to meet her, and we felt very honoured that she'd gone to all that trouble. And we hope to collaborate again with her next year. She's, I think, very keen to do so. So, we thought we'd introduce Stacy to the podcast audience. Here she is. Well, Stacy, welcome to London.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
What brings you over here?
Well, I came here to come to a live show and to meet you guys, and also to see some ceramics in the museums.
Well, we should explain. So, I first came into contact with you a few years ago when you were very kind to send me a mug, one of your beautiful mugs. I think you sent one to Joe Dombrowski as well, who you'd heard on the podcast. And so we began a collaboration this year. You produced mugs for the Giro, the Tour, and the Vuelta, which raised a lot of money for good causes. And, 300 people now own these mugs as well. And here you are. You've come, you're probably our furthest travelled guest tonight for our show in London. But, what's this kind of collaboration been like for you?
It's been amazing. It has been an experience of a lifetime, really. You know, I've spent the last couple years listening to the podcast while I work in my studio, and then, you know, knowing that, you know, it started with a gift of a handmade cup to you for helping me get the cup to Joe Dombrowski. You know, knowing that now these cups are in the hands of more than 300 people, you know, kind of around the world is really kind of mind-blowing.
Well, when they went on sale on day one of the Giro for the first time, I think we were all pretty uncertain about whether people would actually buy them. Have you been surprised? Were you surprised at how keen people obviously were to get them?
Yes, I was very surprised. I didn't know how they would sell. You know, you and I had emailed, and I thought, you know, well, maybe some people will, you know, people are willing to, you know, spend $100 on a pair of cycling socks, but, you know, are they going to want to buy a handmade cup and then pay for shipping to Europe, which is not insignificant. But it is very meaningful that they wanted to buy them, and that, you know, now, and that they sold in, you know, the first batch sold in a couple of hours, which was really, you know, just, it was not something I expected. And then the next couple batches sold in several minutes, and that was even more exciting.
One of the things we tried to do was pick good causes on both sides of the Atlantic, right, because we figured that probably a lot of American listeners would buy the cups. And one of the good causes was the David Carey Scholarship Foundation, which is quite local to you in Virginia, and you were able to actually go there with the check, weren't you?
Yes, I was. Yeah, I don't actually live close to Roanoke, but I grew up not far from Roanoke. It's about an hour from there. So I was driving down to my hometown, which is Blacksburg, Virginia, this summer, and I got in touch with the person that runs the David Carey Scholarship Fund, and arranged to meet him to give him the check. And we met at this lovely little bike shop, and I met two of his young youth riders, and handed him over the check and had a nice little chat with him about, you know, how much the charity would mean to the program. You know, he said it's a small program, and that the money would definitely be put to good use for these youth, young cyclists riding.
What I meant to ask you, what drew you to cycling in the first place?
I cycle some, mostly around town with my kids, and I have a bike, but I really enjoy the story of watching Grand Tours. You know, it started with watching the Tour de France, and went, you know, and then expanded into watching other races. But I think that there is a real story that is told in professional cycling. You know, especially the Grand Tours. That, you know, there's that the scene, the setting is amazing, and there's a antagonist and a protagonist, and there's a you know, there's stories within stories, and I think that and I started listening to the podcast because the podcast brought those stories more to life, and so that, you know, that's, you know, so through the years I've really been, you know, following the story of professional cycling, you know, through the cycling podcast, and you know, and I often listen to it while I work in my studio and watch races while I work in my studio, and so you
document a lot of your work on social media in the studio, and I've got this image of you, you know, and it seems like the perfect accompaniment, you know, bike racing on the background, working away. Is that far from the reality? Is that pretty much your working life?
That's pretty much my working life. If there's,
that's great.
Yeah, it is great. If there's, you know, if there's not a bike race on, I'll listen to audiobooks or other podcasts that aren't the cycling podcast. But you know, my happiest times are when I'm, you know, when there's a bike race on and a podcast to listen to afterwards.
Stage 9, the Queen stage of the Cycling Podcast Grand Tour, of course. I've said that every night, don't worry. I actually haven't.
No, you haven't. That's the first time.
No. Home to Great Britain's greatest ever Olympian, Sir Chris Hoy, Edinburgh that is, not this theatre, and home also to R. Moore, a non-finisher in the 1998 Commonwealth Games. More on that a bit later, but I think you probably owe your countrymen and women some kind of explanation, Richard. Why didn't you finish?
I don't live here anymore. I had to leave.
The chat on the train coming up here. There'll be people waiting for me at the station. I am to Edinburgh what Pantani was to Cesenatico. They still talk about the 3-minute turn I did on the front of the Wee Willie McWinkle chain gang, 1983.
You ever been to Scotland before, Daniel?
Now, Daniel, you're a real stickler for the rules when it comes to drinking cappuccino. You scold me whenever I have one after the hour of 11 o'clock. But you absolutely stunned me with your revelation that you would think nothing of going cycling in a world champion's jersey, despite, to the best of my knowledge, not being world champion at cycling.
At age 14.
No excuse. What do you reckon, Edinburgh? Any excuse? A bit of a grumble. What on earth is this?
Well, Lionel, the brief for this week was bring some of your favourite kits. He didn't mention cycling. So that's Ivan Lendl's jersey, shirt for the 1987 Wimbledon, which is one of my favourite kits of all time.
Who is the Ivan Lendl of cycling?
It's got to be Rog, hasn't it? We had this conversation the other day, didn't we? We had a question, who your favourite interviewees, and I sort of maligned the fact that Richard loves the sort of, private school educated, very, very eloquent, Hemingway reading,
guys that can string a sentence together are useful for a podcast.
I kind of like it.
The bar's quite low.
I kind of like the guys the sort of primevals and Neanderthals who look like they might deck you if you ask the wrong question. And Rog is definitely in that, Primoz Roglic is definitely in that category. I would suggest a bit of a kindred spirit of Ivan Lendl.
Well, getting back to cycling, we've got the Androni Giocottoli team jersey. How's the pronunciation tonight? Is it getting better or worse?
No, worse than last night, if that's possible.
But, I mean, obviously a design classic with just the 24 logos on it. Bit more about them later on.
It's not actually, that's not the record-setting, I don't think, 24 logo jersey. Gianni Savio, most of you will probably know, he's the boss of that team, and the mustachioed kingpin of that team, the Swiss Tony of Italian cycling. But Gianni and I've known Gianni for many years now. I used to ghost his column for Pro Cycling, and there was one month where I actually asked him, Gianni, everyone talks about the number of sponsors on your jersey. Let's just go through each one. And so we did, and he talked about the kind of relationship which had led to the deal in each case. But there was one logo in particular that really intrigued me. It was Guava Berry Golf. And Gianni is very proud of his sporting heritage, but when you actually sort of drill down into it, he basically played pub football in a village just outside Turin for a couple of years. But he always says, I come from football, and that's his preface to every answer. But I said, Gianni, this Guava Berry Golf, tell me about where that came from. And he said, he said a golf course in Dominican Republic. And I said, yeah, but how did you do it? And he said, well, I went on holiday there, and beautiful golf course. Daniel, you should have seen it. You would have loved it. But Gianni, talk to me about the sort of economics. And he said, there was a lovely girl at reception, and she offered me a free tea time the next day, and a free lager in the bar. And I basically figured out, this was in about 2011, I basically realised that for Gianni, putting a sponsor's name on the jersey is sort of his equivalent of a retweet or a like on Twitter. If he likes the cut of your jib, you might end up on his jersey.
Chute à l'arrière du peloton, cycling podcast team car at the back of the pack, please.
That's the voice of Seb PK interrupting this week's episode to remind me to tell you that it is supported by Beer 52.
We had a question from one of our audience members asking, what is it that Seb PK actually says there?
Chute arrière du peloton.
So crash at the back of the peloton.
Exactly, yep. Cycling podcast to collect their case of Beer 52. How does the offer of free beer sound to you?
It sounds great, especially with Christmas coming up.
Well, Lionel, as a loyal listener of the show, we'd like to reward you with just that, free beer. Thanks to our friends at beer52.com, you, and by you I mean you the listener, have the opportunity to sip 8 free exclusive craft beers from around the world. All you need to do is go to beer52.com/cycle and pay £4.95 to cover the postage. What's more, Cycling Podcast listeners get 2 extra free beers, so that's a total of 10 free beers. Claim this before the 17th of December to guarantee they arrive in time for Christmas.
Would make a perfect gift for a friend or relative who likes a range of different beers from all around the world. You are signing up to join the monthly Beer 52 club by taking up this offer, but you can cancel at any time. So why not give it a whirl? My case arrived just before we set off for this week's shows, and they are beers from or inspired by Portland in Maine in New England. So our friend on the Cycling Tips podcast, Kaylee Fretz, would probably enjoy those, wouldn't he?
Well, as well as the best, most interesting beer that money can buy, your case will include the award-winning craft beer magazine Ferment, which explains the monthly theme and the individual beers that you'll receive, and a cheeky snack is thrown in just to top it all off. If you don't like dark beers or IPA or lager, you can customise the box to suit your palate. Just go to beer52.com/cycle to get your first case of 8 beers for free. And don't forget, Cycling Podcast customers get an extra 2 unmissable beers for free. That's beer52.com/cycle, BEER, the number 5, the number 2.com/cycle to claim this unmissable deal by the 17th of December and guarantee your pre-Christmas delivery.
Quite a good question we didn't get to here, Richard, from John O'Kane. Do you think we'll ever return to a situation where most, if not all, of the top stars of the sport race a full season? It's not much good for a fan when so many of them disappear for weeks on end. That is a good question because, we know that the Grand Tour riders target 1 or maybe 2 of the races, and there's almost like a sort of a Venn diagram, isn't it? They overlap, but they don't all come together in the same tour. It's we had the situation a few years ago with the Galacticos, the Big Four, as we called them: Froome, Nibali, Contador, and Quintana, when they were kind of the elite of the Grand Tour riders, and got very excited when they all started the Tour de France together. That is still quite a rarity, and I've always said it's a bit like boxing belts, isn't it? The heavyweight champions win the various belts, and then at some point the stars align and there's a sort of unification fight where winner takes all, and every so often the Tour de France happens to be that event, and we are kind of waiting to see, Dumoulin, Bernal, Froome perhaps, and Roglic now, Pogacar. We would love to see them all come together in the Tour de France. I think the difficulty when it comes to the one-day races is that they're now so specialist that you're not going to see the riders. You might see a little bit of overlap between Liège-Bastogne-Liège and the Tour of Flanders, but Flanders and Roubaix go together and the hilly races go together, and there's not a great deal of overlap there. And I think one of the things that came out of a lot of the discussion following the Rapha roadmap, the idea that the season must have some kind of overarching narrative, a beginning, a middle and an end, and some kind of defining moment to crown the best rider of the season in a particular race. I just don't think that cycling really works like that. I mean, it could be altered so it did work like that, but it would require everybody in the sport and the fans to adopt something else, a new event probably, as the thing that crowns and defines the best rider of the year, because, the World Championships doesn't do that. It defines the best one-day rider on one particular day. The Tour de France is the biggest and most prestigious stage race, and so it would require a real rethink, and quite a radical rethink, I think, to have a situation that would bring all the riders of disparate talents together.
Weirdly, one of the races that does that is Amstel Gold Race. In a way, it gets the guys who are good in the Cobble Classics and the guys who are targeting the Ardennes races that are coming up. It's quite a good sort of melting pot.
I think the problem is there's too much information and good information about feedback from the riders' training, which enables them to tailor training, enables their coaches to tailor their training, and I remember speaking to Philippe Gilbert in the Vuelta this year about how well he could sort of reproduce the exercise, the efforts that he needed to do to prepare for the World Championships in a race like the Vuelta, and he said, well, it's almost impossible. There's this idea that it's a great race to prepare for the Worlds, and you do, it is helpful for certain things, but he was almost admitting there and then that it could be quite frustrating at times because, you felt that you needed to do a certain type of effort on a certain day, and the race turned out completely differently, and you ended up doing an effort that was kind of the opposite of what you needed. And I think the big stars of the sport hold their sort of big objectives so dear that they're not willing to compromise by and sort of potentially jeopardise their preparation for that by doing other races.
Here's another one that we didn't get to last night. Which is your favourite photograph, pro cycling photograph?
Well, I was going to make a claim for the famous picture from the 1964 Tour de France on the Puy de Dôme. It's a black and white picture. They're clearly, racing, giving it absolutely everything. But the thing that really stands out to me is that the people riding motorbikes are not wearing helmets. The riders themselves aren't wearing helmets. Poulidor's got a cloth cotton cap on. Anquetil is in the yellow jersey. And it just is a defining image of a rivalry that spanned such a long period of time. Of course, Anquetil always got the upper hand. And I think that just sprung to mind for me because Poulidor passed away so recently.
I think, Rich, when the question was asked the other day, the first image that came into my head was an image of Marco Pantani winning at Les Deux Alpes in the 1998 Tour de France, and he sort of came over the line that day having beaten Jan Ulrich and taken the yellow jersey off him by about 8 minutes. He came over the line with sort of his arms had sort of fallen down to almost to his side, and it was kind of a sort of crucifixion style pose, and there was just a sort of a kind of pathos in sort of Pantani's expression. There was no real jubilation. Obviously primarily due to the effort of the stage that he'd just done through the Alps in terrible conditions, but it was almost a prelude to what happened next, or presage what happened next in Pantani's career and his life. We know that the next year he failed a hematocrit test at the Giro d'Italia, and it was all sort of downhill from there in Pantani's professional and personal life. And I still think it's a very sort of poignant photo. I think it's the photo on the cover of Matt Rendell's excellent book about Pantani.
Mine is the image of Matt White running on the on the Col de Liseron in the 2019 Tour de France. No, but it's that is an incredible image. It's on the front of our new book, which is not why I mentioned it, but it is an incredible image that speaks to the sense of chaos and confusion on that day. Simon Gill took it, and when we looked at those pictures, that one, there was a sequence of pictures of Matt White at the summit, and a sense of, that an air of giddiness almost that you see sometimes when things just take an unusual turn. The riders who thought they were, had a big day in the saddle being told to suddenly stop. That picture, it's on the front cover of our book, and it's a great image, I think. Another image that I really like is the one of Pantani in the 98 Tour sitting cross-legged on the road. Again, not a cycling picture as such, but the expression on his face and knowing all that we know now, reading into that, they were protesting their treatment in the midst of this huge doping scandal. There's just so much to see in that picture and to try and fathom. But my favourite cycling picture is probably from the 86 Tour, and it's Le Monde and Hinault on Alpe d'Huez. Le Monde in the yellow jersey, Hinault in the combined jersey, riding together to the finish, and there was this sort of pact between them at this point. They'd fought this battle, and both looked great, in Le Monde, and it, ironically, one of the reasons I liked them and that team was their jersey was great. None of them was wearing it that day, the La Vie Claire jersey, but it's a great image. Graham Watson's pictures, several of them from that day, are just fantastic.
Can I just answer this one? Francois mentioned that last year was Romain Bardet's worst tour as a climber, yet he won the King of the Mountains competition. With that in mind, what is the point of the polka dot? Should it be replaced, revamped? Now, it's silly season, so I'm going to mention, a wacky suggestion to completely throw the cat among the pigeons at the Tour de France. Daniel's already shaking his head here. If I was Christian Prudhomme, I would designate a year now, maybe 2 or 3 years in the future. I'd get Strava on board and I'd make the King of the Mountains competition. Hang on, I know this is your idea. Hang on, but I'm gonna develop it.
Okay.
So the King of the Mountains competition would be run on time, aggregate climbing time on the designated climbs. Daniel's idea. The yellow jersey would be basically a points competition. So the overall race would be an aggregate of points, and the green jersey would be purely for the sprinters. So you would get the best all-rounder winning the Tour, the best climber winning the polka dots, and the best sprinter winning the green jersey, and everyone would be happy.
The Cycling Podcast is supported by Science in Sport. Science in Sport. Fueled by science.
Thank you very much indeed to Science and Sport. In fact, one of the it's not a question as such, but somebody has written on these pieces of paper SIS CP25. That's all they've written. That's the code, of course, to get 25% off your Science and Sport products at scienceandsport.com. And it was also great to have Stephen Moon at our event the other night, the Chief Executive of Science and Sport. Thanks for coming, Stephen. Hope you enjoyed it. And thanks to Science and Sport for their ongoing support of the Cycling Podcast. Now, on the train today, we got onto our train to Leicester from Derby and walked onto the carriage and bumped into our co-presenter of Service Course, the latest episode of which has just come out this week.
Well, it was extraordinary. It was like bumping into British professional riders, because we also I didn't speak to him, but Dan Pearson, former Team Wiggins and Aqua Blue rider, now with the Canyon team. He was getting on with his bike at, I think, Sheffield. But yeah, like you say, we sat down next to Lizzy Banks. I mean, completely unplanned. She's on her way down to London for the Cycling Weekly annual awards due, and she'll be in Manchester with us on Saturday, along with Adam Blythe at our event at the Royal Northern College of Music. And well, there's just about time to still get tickets for that from thecyclingpodcast.com if you'd like to come along.
Yeah, she'll be joining us on stage, and as I said, the latest episode of Service Course, which she co-presents with Tom Wally. She, of course, is a stage winner at the Giro Rosa this year. She rides for Bigla, who become Bigla Katusha next year. And this latest episode of Service Course I really, really enjoyed, especially her feature from the hill climb scene, which is quite a little niche subculture in British cycling. And it's how she got into cycling. It's a place where you see quite extreme equipment choices and weight loss for the bikes. So she went along recently to the Mamnick hill climb near to her home in Sheffield, and recorded a great little package from there, which opens the latest episode of Service Course. Grabbed a quick word with her about the hill climbing scene, really, on the train to Leicester. Well, look who we've bumped into on our train to Leicester for our live show. It's Lizzy Banks.
Hi Rich, how are you?
Good. We got on the same carriage. You're on your way to London, and we're on our way to Leicester from Edinburgh. And we've all just been listening to the latest episode of Service Course and your great feature on the hill climbing scene, Mamnick hill climb. Tell us a bit about it, because it's not a scene that we cover a lot in the Cycling Podcast, but tell us about the hill climbing scene.
Yeah, so the hill climbing scene is a really fantastic thing that's kind of pretty niche and really only found in the UK. For me, it was how I started cycling. I entered the local university, or the university hill climb competition, and I'd only bought a bike about 3 weeks before, and I rocked herb. I raced it, I came 5th, and then I kind of thought, maybe I've got something here. And it was that first hill climb that kind of gave me the desire to start racing. So then I started racing with British.
When was this?
This was October 2014 was the hill climb, and then I started road racing with British Cycling in 2015. Then I went back to hill climbing in the end of 2015, did all the local circuit, won most of the races, and it was kind of the community atmosphere, this amazing thing where it's just you, your bike, and the hill. It's really different to traditional time trialing in the UK when, you know, you've got the traffic and you've got the roundabouts and you've got all the people with all their gear. But hill climbing is so pure. I feel like it's the purest form of time trialing in the UK. You just rock up, you go for it, you give it everything you've got, and unless you end up out of breath on the floor in a ditch, you've not done it properly.
Well, I mean, time trialing is a sort of subculture, and hill climbing is a subset of that subculture in a way. You see quite specialist and extreme bikes, but listening to your package from the hill climb, it's not necessarily expensive bikes. People are they improvise quite a lot, they innovate with old equipment, and the key is to get it as light as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that you can be very specialist with your bike, but also you can just take what you've got and you can strip it down. You know, when I did it in the first year, I just had the bike I had. I actually had an old pair of handlebars, and I weighed both handlebars, and I worked out that it was lighter to chop off a particular pair and put that on. So I hacksawed off this just 20 quid pair of handlebars, took off all my bar tape, unscrewed the front chain ring, and then screwed it back on, just the small chain ring back on using some a couple of pennies worth of washers to make sure there was enough space so I didn't have single chainring bolts, taking out the wiring for the front mech, taking off the front mech, taking off those bolts, and all these things, they were tiny things. You know, I didn't have super expensive race wheels, I didn't have carbon saddles, stuff like that, but all these things actually added up to 1.5 kilos and gave me a pretty decent bike that would fly up the hills.
And one thing that confuses me a little bit, not being very bright, is that in the last episode of Service Course you talked about the weight limit for bikes, obviously in UCI races. That obviously doesn't apply in hill climbs, and bikes can be as light as, I think, 4.5 kilos. Why does that weight limit not apply for hill climbs?
So when you've got road racing, which is regulated by the UCI have their minimum weight limit, which is 6.8 kilos. Hill climbing and time trialing in the UK is regulated by cycling time trials, so it's a completely different set of regulations. They're things like you don't actually have to wear a helmet for time trialing in the UK, which I would always wear a helmet for a time trial on a dual carriageway, for instance, but a hill climb where you're just going up the hill, I wouldn't wear a helmet, and I would have someone at the top with my helmet, so if I had to ride down it was safe. So cycling time trials also doesn't have any weight limit. It doesn't have the kind of regulations that you would have for a time trial bike as well, in terms of dimensions that you do have with the UCI. You know, things like you can't have more than 80 centimetres from your bottom bracket to your end of your skis on a time trial bike. So none of that exists with cycling time trials. So you're really free to do whatever you want to do to the bike, which, yeah, I mean, it comes up with some weird and wonderful manipulations, and if you listen to Service Course you'll hear some of them. But yeah, it's a great way to see incredible innovations in bikes, and you really find these amazing people who have so much passion for cycling and also hacking and bodging, and they do some really crazy things to their bikes and get them down to below 5 kilos.
So you did Mamnik, you set a new course record, but it was sort of the tail end of your season. Is that it for hill climbs for you for this year?
Yeah, so I was only doing that one for fun, really. I know that's a bit of an oxymoron. But yeah, so just doing Mamnik for fun, and maybe next year I'll get back to some if it fits with my road racing plan.
What's the off-season look like for you? You've just had a holiday, but what else? What's coming up?
Yeah, so I had a nice couple of weeks in Thailand. Then I've had a few weeks just getting back to it, kind of slowly getting into the routine. You know, hours on the bike, hours in the gym, working on my weaknesses.
Making podcasts,
making really exciting podcasts. Great for listening to on the turbo, which I actually did yesterday, and it really helped the hours go past. And then, I'm off to Mallorca over Christmas to get some kind of quality riding in the sunshine, and hopefully, just building up for what will be hopefully a bigger and better 2020 than 2019.
Olympics?
We'll see. We only have qualified, the UK have only qualified 2 spots for the Olympics, and there's a lot of good riders around, so it's going to be a really, really tough fight to make the team, but I'll do everything I can, as always.
Right, fellas. Well, it's not long till curtain up here in Leicester, so we better get ourselves ready. What's your? We've got an hour to go. 45 minutes actually. What's your build up like now, Daniel?
Well, we still have to sing the national anthem, don't we? Which we do every night.
Vocal exercises.
Which one do you do, Daniel? Or which one do we all do?
We don't do a national anthem.
No, we don't. Well, I just think, try and keep the nerves under wraps. Hopefully, break a leg.
Break a leg. And thanks very much to everybody who's come along to the shows. It's been absolutely wonderful, great fun. We've really enjoyed it. And I mentioned the book earlier, The Grand Tour Diaries. That is out now. It's not for sale on Amazon or in bookshops. It's only available through the cyclingpodcast.com. Great Christmas present, or just a great read. Go and buy it. It's £15 and we'll post it anywhere in the world. The cyclingpodcast.com. Where are we now, Lionel?
We are round the corner from the Y Theatre in Leicester in a restaurant called Kayal, which has been recommended to us by Simon Harrison, who was the joint winner of our King of the Mountains at the World Top Championship ride we did during the World Championships in Yorkshire a couple of months ago. He won one of Stacy Snyder's mugs, but we only had one to give away on the day, so we promised him that we would get him his mug for winning, and we presented it to him on stage at the end of our event around the corner in the Y Theatre, and he in turn recommended we come here for dinner. And I'm just looking on the menu, and the restaurant has been featured in the Hairy Bikers programme on BBC Two. Paul Hollywood and Ainsley Harriott are, and it says vegan trend down here, Richard, so
this is wonderful.
This is for you.
And we're joined by somebody else who was presented with a mug on stage, one of Stacy Snyder's beautiful mugs, with World Championship bands, because it's Colin Sturgess, former World Pursuit champion.
Evening both. I think the last time I was in Leicester with Lionel, we were at a restaurant around the corner called The Case. So, yeah, it's getting to be a habit. A good one, I might.
Yeah, Lunch With, that was one of our friends' specials last year. But, Colin, you joined us on stage. Did you enjoy that? I mean, there were a few questions that you were able to, shed some light on your past experiences with Shane Sutton, your career with ADR, with Adrie van der Poel, the father of Matthew van der Poel, of course. Do you enjoy sort of reliving your days as a professional?
Yeah, very much. I didn't for many, many years. As Lionel and I touched on in the previous podcast we did, I went away from the sport pretty disillusioned and didn't have anything to do with it for almost 12 years. But, sort of falling back in love with the sport, you start reliving things, and I guess, a lot of the dark times and a lot of the hassles I've had just tend to fall away, and you do come up with good remembrances.
Well, you were talking about going over to Belgium as a 16-year-old and living in a rat-infested loft in a house, but is there a moment where that becomes less a kind of scarring experience and more an entertaining anecdote? I mean, is there a moment where all those experiences that at the time must have been very hard, you kind of look back on them with a sense of almost sort of pride that you got through? Yeah,
it does. I remember meeting Piper for second or third time and listening to some of his anecdotes and whatever, and thinking like, wow, that's just amazing. And you sat there transfixed listening, to all these stories and sort of battle stories, whatever you want to call them. It's quite nice now when we go out training with some of the youngsters and whatever, and they ask you about your experiences and you can relay them, and like you say, it's anecdote and it's tall tales, so it's good.
You were working in sort of team management when we met in the restaurant not too far from here for that lunch with for friends of the podcast. I think 2018 that was. So yeah, I'd encourage anyone to go back and listen to that, because I really enjoy. I mean, it was a couple of hours chat in the end, wasn't it? A real kind of absorbing story and conversation that we had. But what are you up to now? You're still involved in cycling?
Yeah. So. Typically, my sort of bipolar kicked in a little bit towards the end of 2018 with Madison Genesis, and I wasn't getting out of it what I wanted, and I felt it grossly unfair to sort of, I guess, just be there and go through the motions, and I resigned after the Tour of Britain, and I went travelling around Southeast Asia, Thailand, Cambodia, Laos, and then 2 weeks basically just backpacking through Vietnam and chilled out, got my head right, and I've spent pretty much this year just riding my bike and setting up a little coaching company with a friend of mine, Rob Orr. So we called it Champion Cycling Services, and we basically sort of offer, as I said, the coaching side of things, but also a bit of team management. You know, if you need UCI forms done for a new team, well, you know, we can do them. I can drive DS, I can drive neutral service, done a little bit of commentary for Eurosport. So, you know, there's many sort of aspects to the little company. We'll try to keep it small and you know, quite bijou, but yeah.
And you're based in Leicester, obviously, now, but travel is obviously something that you love. I mean, is that still a big part of your life as well?
Yeah, it is. I love just almost sometimes an impromptu sort of getaway. As I say, last year was great. You know, sort of went on this 6-week hike around Asia, and then spent 2 months in Calpe at the beginning of this year. Spent 2 months next year as well in Calpe. So, yeah, and the more the merrier. I just love it.
So you're going to be running, coaching, training camps and rides from Calpe in southern Spain, very popular spot for training camps. I mean, how can people find out more about this business that you've set up, and the coaching side in particular?
Give us a follow on Twitter. We're having a website set up. It's in the throes. I mean, we've literally only sort of launched this week, and we've already picked up 3 or 4 riders. But yeah, in the next week to 2 weeks, we'll have the website up and running, and there'll be all the info on there. So it's Champion Cycling Services, yeah, it should be good. As I say, we don't profess to know everything, and we want to keep it fun, because one of the things, as I said to you, Lionel, in the last Friends of the podcast, you know, once the fun goes out of things, then it just becomes a chore. And you know, bike riding is supposed to be fun. I mean, that's what we're all in it for.
I just wanted to ask you, with your pursuiting head, on what you thought of Filippo Ganna's world record rides, and whether there are any similarities between the way you raced when you your trademark move was to keep it steady and then really turn on the gas in the sort of final quarter of the race, I guess, and now it's just such a measured, disciplined, sort of by the numbers event. I mean, can you see are they almost two different disciplines?
Yeah, you know, we touched on this on stage earlier, and I think the biggest thing now, obviously, you know, taking aside the training, taking aside gearing and aerodynamics, which is major. One of the big things is it's become less of an endurance sport. It's now, when you've got the 4 kilometre pursuit run over 2 rounds, it's almost become more like a sprint event. You become a hybrid of a rider. You know, that kilo effort into stretching it into sort of the 4-minute barrier now, and I can see likenesses in sort of Ganna and myself, in as much that he does finish fast, but I think a lot of that comes as the gearing. You know, he's pushing 60-14, which is 118-inch gear. By the time you're in the 3rd kilometre, you've really got that wound up, so of course you're going to finish very, very fast. You know, you're dipping below a minute, literally, you know, getting down to 58-second kilos. That's phenomenal. So yeah, he will finish fast. As you said, you know, I had my trademark pursuiting signature was, you know, a pretty solid start. Wasn't always the fastest in the world, but I could put somebody under pressure, and then I'd plateau and then just go nuts at the finish. I jokingly said on Twitter recently, you know, sort of I'd start fast, get bored out my skull in the middle, and then just, you know, sprint like a loon. And basically that's how I used to do it. And there's a lot of showmanship in it as well. You know, sometimes it let me down, but as a professional rider, there has to be a certain amount of showmanship. People pay good money to come and see you race, and they don't always want it metronomic. They actually do want a bit of excitement. And what more exciting than, you know, coming back from a 2-second deficit and winning by 1.8?
Because it's really a time trial now, whereas what you were doing was match pursuiting, and when you won the world title in '89, they were match races, weren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. You could win a pursuit round, with a 6-minute ride over 5 kilometres. But as long as you had something in the bag and knew that come the final, you probably have to, drop that down 20 seconds. As long as you had it in there. All you needed to do was cross the line first. It didn't matter about the time. Now, obviously, it does matter massively about the time because of the later seedings and the later qualification rounds. But then it was literally match pursuiting, as in match sprinting, I guess. So.
Just about Daniel isn't here to hear all this talk about indoor cycling, although Colin won indoor cycling outdoors back in 1989 at the track in Lyon. But we better order our award-winning curries here, I think. They've been keeping away. We should wrap things up for this episode.
Yeah, nearly wrap things up for our Grand Tour. Will there still be time for people to get a last-minute ticket for Manchester on Saturday night?
I believe so.
So thecyclingpodcast.com, if you want to come along and hear us, that's me, Richard and Daniel, plus Adam Blythe and Giro stage winner Lizzy Banks at the Royal Northern College of Music on Saturday night. Go to the website or buy a ticket on the door, I think.
Thank you, Lionel, and thank you very much, Colin.
Thank you both.
You have been listening to The Cycling Podcast. Subscribe to our newsletter at thecyclingpodcast.com to get all the latest news and special offers delivered straight to your inbox. This episode was edited and produced by Tom Wally.